1 billion rising. What's the whole ambition?
1 billion rising is to gather 1 billion men and women who will reflect the numbers of women who are affected by violence at any time. The UN, the statistics from the UN state that 1 in 3 women will be affected by rape or abuse, and that 1 billion women at any one time are affected by violence.
The 14th of February is the first time you do this. Obviously you weren't going to billion the first time round, but this is a movement which intends to build?
A movement which...
This is a movement which intends to build, intends to grow?
Yes, I think so. V-Day...
This is not a one-off?
It's not a one-off, although V-Day has claimed February the 14th, Valentine's Day, as V-Day, and that's been going on for 15 years. So 1 billion rising is an extension of that. But I think that really once it's in the public consciousness, it will never go away. And I think it's also just to show that it's always been here. 1 billion rising has always been here. We just haven't been aware of it.
Is it specifically the appalling rape case in India that has galvanised this particular moment?
Well, Eve Ensler, who created the campaign, really does feel that India is now leading the way it responded to the rape and death of Jyoti Singh and how the country is galvanised as a result of it. Yes, although we've been building up to 1 billion rising for a year now, so in a way what happened there in Delhi was just an example of what we are trying to raise awareness over.
But the continent of some of your forefathers is also very much in the eye of this storm too. I mean, South Africa, an appalling case even in this last few days.
Yes, that's right.
Are you looking across the world or specifically at the Indian subcontinent?
Across the world. The Congo, there's a picture here, was the place that really prompted Eve to create 1 billion rising, and Congo has been called the worst place in the, it is the worst place in the world to be a woman. And the rape that goes on there as a weapon of war is just unparalleled. But I think that really 1 billion rising, as we've seen, is going across cultural lines, political lines, class lines. It's a pandemic. Violence towards women is a pandemic which is affecting, mankind.
But then presumably you have to have a programme of ways in which you think you can get delivery of change. I mean, for example, pressuring governments, talking to the United Nations. I mean, do you actually find a willing ear?
Well, interestingly, because violence against women is different in different parts of the world, so different parts of the world are responding to the campaign differently. In England, we're looking at sex education and embracing violence in the home and relationships to be part of the curriculum for sex education. In Mexico, they're dealing with sex trafficking, so they're focusing on whatever is most problematic for them to do with violence against women. So it is obviously different in different parts of the world, yes.
Something we've looked at a lot on this programme is the younger and younger sexualisation of girls and boys, for that matter. Is that something which exercises 1 billion rising?
I think so, yes, definitely. I think that, how women perceive themselves as a result of abuse is something which is incredibly powerful. And I think 1 billion rising is a campaign which will allow for greater awareness of the wrongness of what's going on. I mean, if you think about South Africa, for example, girls there call rape sex. That's how much it's a part of their they're growing up as adolescents.
They literally see rape as a natural consequence of being introduced to sex.
Exactly. So the awareness, what will happen with 1 billion rising, hopefully, is it's also an education, a global education, that there are certain, rights that women are entitled to. And I think, because I really do think that the perception of how women perceive themselves after they've been violated is extraordinary. I mean, I feel personally, growing up and having been exposed to, I was violated as a young teen, and how I perceived myself was incredibly problematic, and that probably I became my own worst enemy of how I, expected to be treated.
What about the Islamic world? I mean, you're having to cross cultures,
yes.
You're having to cross religions, different faiths have different approaches to women. How do you deal with that?
Well, again, different places will have different responses. There are some places that literally can't, you know, 1 Billion Rising is about going out into the streets, dancing.
Well, I mean, would you see women in the Arab world, for example, specifically in Saudi Arabia, for example?
No, so there are degrees of how much they can say enough and vocalize that. I mean, in Somalia, women risk their lives going out into the streets and dancing and saying enough. So again, it's about raising awareness. It's also about empowering grassroots organisations to continue with the work that they're doing. And I think when women look outside of their own social norms and recognise that there are different ways of being in other parts of the world, and perhaps want to invite that into their culture, I think it just starts a seed which grows.
And when you say in part that you are motivated by what happened to you, I mean, I don't want to, you know, bring out something you don't want to talk about, but what did happen to you?
Well, in the industry that I'm in, I was a young woman, very naive, and was preyed on by directors.
What, literally in your teens?
Yes, I was exploited, and you know, I think that it's a lot to do with how women were perceived, how women are perceived, and I just don't think that I didn't feel like I had any power because men were in the positions of authority.
I mean, do you, in a sense, equate that with that sense that women in South Africa think sex and rape are?
Well, I certainly wouldn't go so far as to think that, but I think there are degrees, yes, of how much you. There are certain expectations as a young woman that you feel you have to perform or have to give. You
mean that in the cinema industry, you're a beautiful young actress. I've given you a good part.
Yeah.
The rest is music?
Well, again, the way you're brought up, what you're exposed to politically and socially will affect how you take that invitation. And if there had been a campaign like 1 Billion Rising, if I'd known a woman like Eve Ensler, if I'd been exposed to someone like me, for example, when I was a 16-year-old in film, I would have had a different attitude. And that is why I feel so passionately about allowing this to be as big and as bold and to reach as many young women and women of all ages as possible.
But if I take you to your probably most celebrated movie, Crash, you were sexually assaulted by a policeman in Crash.
Absolutely, yeah.
And very, very badly mishandled. How did you feel acting that for a start?
Oh, it was awful, especially as I had read the script. And in the script, it was only alluded to that there was molestation. I had actually read it as just he puts his hand up her skirt and that's enough, and to me that was enough of a violation. So when we got to the set that evening and the director said, "So are you wearing protective underwear?" And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" He said, "Well, because Matt Dillon, who is playing the police officer, is going to have to really grope around to simulate entrance into your body." I was horrified, absolutely horrified. And I also felt really, I panicked because I thought, do I want to be part of this, representing the police in this way? You know, I felt a degree of responsibility there as well. But they'd done their research and felt that it was important to really go that far.
But what effect do you think that has on a cinema audience? To what extent do you think it plays into a kind of culture in which this is fair game? Well,
what was very good about Crash is that it went behind the curtain. Yes, it's a racist police officer who is antagonising these people, but he is also the subject of trauma at the hands of his father, who had trauma. And I think that's one thing that I've found in the work that I've done, is that, you know, I'm fascinated by the perpetrators of the violence that we're talking about and why they're doing what they're doing. And there seems to be also an epidemic of trauma, male trauma, which they're trying to work out through destroying women. And it's a kind of species suicide. And that's what we have to really, really focus on, the fact that you abuse women, you are abusing the future of mankind.
you speak to this from a sort of intimate personal experience, and that's why you're going to be in Parliament Square on the 14th.
Next Thursday, yeah.
But isn't the whole ambition of this project so broad that it kind of doesn't go anywhere?
No, I don't think so, because we're not doing the same thing all over the world. Each country, each city is looking at their own specific issues and allowing 1 Billion Rising to draw attention to their own specific issues. And that's what's so wonderful.
But I'm a government, and I see you out in my square,
yeah.
And I think, oh gosh, now what's all this about? What do I have to do?
Well, interestingly, on the 14th of February, we're outside Parliament for a reason, because that's when they're passing a bill about sex education. And so our presence there will put pressure on that to take place. So, you know, we're using 1 Billion Rising to target specific areas of action. And that's just one of them. And it's going to be the same all over the world.
So we can expect, after this particular demonstration,
yeah.
Kind of stormtroopers who can be summoned when there is a major issue that you think goes to the core of what you're really protesting about.
1 Billion Rising will not go away. It's going to be a presence in all of our countries, all of our lives from now on. And I know that because of the desire of so many people around the world to take part. The joy that people feel being able to take part. We are having a platform to actually talk about these things. And raising them into our consciousness is going to be, I mean, it's going to be interesting to see what happens after Thursday.
Thandie Newton, thank you very much indeed for talking to us.